Hello, I'm Soycat, and welcome back to the second channel Geography videos. Today I wanted to talk about Orkney, which is a part of the UK which is looking at proposals to become a territory of Norway. This is something they put to a vote, and they said they'd do it next week. They did the vote and it has succeeded, but where is Orkney and why does it want to leave the UK? So Orkney is one of the outlying islands of Scotland, which is a part of the United Kingdom, but this means that they have two layers of government they currently deal with. One of these is the Scottish government and the other one is the UK government. And Orkney, being these islands over here, feels as though it should have a close connection to one of these two sets of governments, and it doesn't feel like it is currently getting that. And so it decides it's going to look into becoming either a crown dependency like the Channel Islands, maybe an overseas territory like the Falkland Islands, or maybe even going crazier and becoming something like the Faroe Islands, which are these islands right over here. They're pretty close by. These are a self-governing territory of Denmark, where Denmark just sends them a bunch of money and they say, yes, we are Danish and you can use our waters for defense. They want a deal like that with the UK, or maybe even with Norway. They are going country shopping, which I have to admire, but why exactly does Orkney feel this way? The simple answer is that, again, they do not feel like they have a good deal with the UK or Scottish government. They think they've been failed dreadfully, and that's because of the fact that they have to replace the entire ferry fleet, which is their main link to the main islands, but they don't get the sorts of things that they'd like to get. The funding from the Scottish government or the funding from the UK government is just not enough to run the sorts of services that they'd like, even when compared to other Scottish areas. So they're saying it's a big failure, and so they just like to leave and deal with it that way. And this sounds like a very dramatic thing to say. Like, you know, sometimes I think to myself, wow, it sure does suck that I am paying too much tax to the government and they give me nothing in return but all these sorts of tasks to deal with. You know, I'm gonna leave the UK and I'm gonna join Luxembourg. Luxembourg, would you like to have me? And, you know, in reality, for most people, this doesn't work. However, Orkney's in a very unique position. One, being a set of islands, as you can see right here, and two, having actually a decent access to natural resources. One of the things that is always mentioned when it comes to these two sets of islands, the Orkney Islands and the Shetland Islands, mostly the Shetland Islands, but it's true for both, is that both these places have a very strong amount of oil money. It says that we have contributed for the last 40 years through North Sea oil, and the dividend we get back isn't sufficient to keep us going. Basically saying, yeah, we have oil, we have resources, we're not even connected to you guys, give us money, which sounds kind of unreasonable, but actually isn't. You know, joining Norway seems like a unrealistic goal, but actually Orkney is a set of islands which started off being a Norwegian place. Can you get that vibe just from the flag alone, by the way? But a really fun fact, in my opinion, is the fact that the only reason that Orkney ever left Norway in the first place is that when I believe it was Denmark at the time, Margaret of Denmark married James III of Scotland, but Margaret's father, Christian I, couldn't afford a dowry, so he just mortgaged the Orkney and Shetland Islands, and by 1472 the debt was still unpaid, so they got the mortgage back, which is the worst origin story, by the way. Like, you can be proud of where you live all you like, but their origin story is the same as if I went out to dinner with my wife and I'm like, yeah, so just so you know, oh god, I don't have any money, so what we're gonna have to do is I'm going to have to, the restaurant comes over, they're desperate for the check, and so what I'm gonna have to do is I'm gonna have to say, don't worry, I'll leave her here and I'll go to the ATM, get some cash, and it'll all be sorted. Don't worry about it, I'll be back real soon. And then if I never go back and the restaurant has my wife, they don't really have to be proud of that story, and either do I. But yeah, that's the story of Auckland joining, that's the story of how Auckland became Scottish. It's because they couldn't afford the mortgage, and so they just figured, you know what, have those islands, do we really want them anyway? And so I guess logically, looking at the UK, or rather at the time, Scotland was an independent colony. It wasn't until the 1700s or so that it actually joined the UK. 1707 is when Scotland and England joined together in a union that would later become the United Kingdom. And they make a really interesting point that they were part of the Norse Kingdom for much longer than they were part of the United Kingdom. They're basically just saying, you know what, given that we were only given as like kind of a backup payment, why don't we just say, now that we have the choice, let's go back to Daddy Denmark. I bet that, Denmark, or rather, Norway, which at the time was part of Denmark, so it's a bit more complicated, because this is an arrangement that works really well for the Faroe Islands, but it also works really well for Greenland. So many people have this fun take where, let's be honest, it's mostly Americans who look at Greenland and go, oh, all those native people are under Denmark, look at the size of Denmark, look at the size of Greenland, that is colonialism, which is the most funny thing coming from the US. But it's interesting that a lot of people from this country will say stuff like that before realizing that, like, actually no, Greenlandic people, there are some that want independence, independence, but most of them look at the situation and go, yeah, so current, not only is unemployment high because the economy is dependent on shrimp and fish and whatnot, but also literally half of the revenue of the government comes from the Danish government. Denmark just says, here is some money, we will keep you around for various defense needs, I guess, but like they bankroll half of the island, and there aren't many people there, which means it's not that expensive for them, but still, they do not want independence unless they have someone else bankrolling them, and that's a kind of similar thing with the Orkney Islands. This comes across as kind of antagonistic towards islands, right? It comes across like I'm saying that, wow, the Orkney Islands are all in the wrong, and actually, it's really unreasonable to just want money from a country, but actually it's a pretty reasonable position to take. Iceland, which is one of the prime members of NATO, fun fact, they don't have a military, they don't need one, they can be supported by their land and their, the sea position they have. There's this huge natural resource that islands are granted by virtue of the way international things work, which is that anywhere within a certain amount of your land belongs to your country, and so ultimately they have this huge sea resource, and they're saying anyone who wants to take it, we will sell it to the highest bidder, which isn't an unreasonable perspective. It's like if your employer is giving you £3 an hour and someone else is like, we'll give you 50, it wouldn't be selling out to go work for the person who gives you more money. That is the basic economic exchange, which they're basically hoping for. So yeah, the Orkney Islands would like to leave Scotland potentially, because also the other problem with Scotland, or rather the other problem with Orkney Islands, is that because they exist under two layers of governance, one of those layers of governance is very insistent on centralizing. So Orkney is not the most pro-Scotland part of the world. In fact, whenever you look at Scottish independence referendums, you'll see that Orkney and Shetland Islands, over here and over here, are always some of the most anti-Scottish independence. They, as much as they do, they might feel Scottish in various ways, not only do they have less of a connection to Scotland, and in particular Edinburgh, but also they're very much reliant on this relationship that kind of gives them as much autonomy as possible, and Scotland is very much not a believer in autonomy. You might have heard that, like, oh yeah, Scotland, big fans of, like, becoming, like, an independent country, and that's true. But one of the interesting ways they're trying to do that is by centralizing as many powers as possible, not down to the local areas, not down to the Highlands or down to the cities or the people who run them, but instead to a centralized Scottish government. And this is something that kind of makes sense in the sense of nation building, but it is a widely shared issue that all sorts of people have. Devolution from Westminster, but not from Holyrood. Scotland as a centralized state is a problem a lot of people have with it, and it leads to all sorts of weird things. So here is a list of the police forces in the UK. We have localized police because in the UK, we're a big believer in, like, policing by consent. You don't police people against their will, you kind of police them as part of them. That is the way that you should do policing, in my opinion, but, I'm British, I'm biased. But you can see that the country is divided into local police forces. I have no idea how we pick these boundaries. Like, this whole area right here is the Thames Valley. I think it's, like, a huge area, one of the biggest in England, and then Bedfordshire gets its own police force for some reason, and then all of the southwest has a police force, and then Yorkshire. I don't understand how we pick the police force areas, but what I do understand is this entire area of Scotland is policed by the same body. In fact, it is the second biggest in the country. Police Scotland is deliberately centralised. The Scottish rail system, ScotRail, deliberately centralised. The way that water works in Scotland, even, this is a wild one. It is it's a Scotland mandate that you do not pay for your water based on how much you use. You get your water for free, and by free I mean you pay for it when you pay your tax every year. This is council tax, the equivalent of property tax. You have to pay a certain amount for your water supply, and you have to pay a certain amount for your wastewater collection, regardless of whether you use water. It also means you can't, there's all sorts of weird fun things about this, but it means that no one actually pays for the amount of water they use. You pay into, like, a collective pool that pays for everyone's water, which is like, it seems like a logical system, but this is a huge amount to pay for water for an average property, one that cost $45,000 to $58,000 in 1991. You are paying over £40 a month. In the rest of the UK, the system is that, you pay for a certain amount of water. You don't pay you pay for an amount of water that's equivalent to roughly your house size. I think it's the number of bedrooms they use for it. Or you pay for the amount of water you use. You get a water meter fitted and they charge you. And I think I pay something like £15 a month. But in Scotland, you have to pay for all those people who, are non-stop leaving on their baths or whatever. It's a weird system, but it's deliberately set up so that it seems like, wow, look at us, we're being good. The government is paying for your water. water and then billing you at the end of the year for your share, which is based on the value of your property. So you pay £1,000 a year for water if you have a very expensive property. There's a lot of really weird things about how Scotland works, and this is just one of the facts that you have to accept, right? Is that Scotland is trying to centralise as part of the nation-building process. If they want Scotland to be a serious independent, if they want them to seem like a serious independent country, they need to very much centralise things and have a very strong government which could then run a country. And I kind of get it, but it leads to all sorts of people having all sorts of issues. And with that said, this is from the Scottish Left Review, radical Scottish political writing. Like the fact is, like, people on the extremes, even who agree with necessarily independence, are like, wait a minute, but I want independence from the Scottish government too, which is where Orkney is arriving at right now, which is, yeah, we would like some money. Even this idea of like road equivalent tariff is an interesting one, because I looked into, here's something fun. Orkney obviously needs to connect to the rest of the UK, but mostly Scotland, via ferries, because there's no bridge right here, and it looks ridiculous to build a bridge. I'll admit, like, if you look at the distance, seems insane. However, I was just, one of the things I found about recently, because I was looking at going to Eastern Canada, so it's really weird, because there's one bridge on and off Prince Edward Island, and I always assumed, because it's called Confederation Bridge, I assumed they built the bridge as a condition of joining the Confederation of Canada, but actually, no, they built the bridge really, really recently. So, Confederation Bridge was built in 1997, and cost 1.3 Canadian billion dollars, which sounds like a really expensive bridge, but the actual way they worked it out is they just figured, we charge a high enough toll equivalent to the ferry fare and the equivalent to the amount of money that the government was spending on the ferries anyway, and then it makes sense to spend $1 billion on a ferry. On a bridge that's 13 kilometers wide, 12.9 kilometers, 8.0 miles, which I just figured, to be fun, I would check against the UK, and as you can see right here, all we gotta do is from John O'Groats to Berwick, as you can see right there, 12.25 kilometers. The exact same thing could work there. Probably, maybe. I just like the idea of building bridges. I think that rather than spending all this money on ferries and replacing a whole fleet of them just so people can get to and from mainland Scotland, just build a bridge. People would be excited to use it. They'd pay a toll, I'm sure. Would they pay 50 Canadian dollars? Maybe not. But yeah, that is the kind of struggle that this thing has. Oh, by the way, I should mention, before I go further in this video was actually sponsored. So this video is sponsored by those people who keep saying the word data brokers in the ad read, and they keep making YouTubers say stuff that really doesn't quite sound true, but you gotta kind of trust them, and you know they're getting paid. And yeah, so if you don't want data brokers stealing your stuff, go to patreon.com/toycat right now, and you can give me money, and I won't give it to data brokers, because they're very much a real thing that is definitely taking all your stuff, and only companies with subscription fees can help it, which is why give your money to me, and I'll cover that for you, trust me. Anyway, speaking of things I can cover for you, it is fun that, like, when you're on, like, YouTube, there are, like, certain companies that go through big ad spends, and it's always annoying when they have something dumb in there, like, ooh, did you know people are tracking you on public Wi-Fi? Use a VPN to avoid that. Or, it's really dumb. Speaking of things that are real dumb, let's go back to the Orkney Islands. No, I actually do agree with the plight of the Orkney Islands. They have no necessary reason to be part of Scotland or the UK, and they're looking and they're saying, why don't we have a better deal? If you look at the Isle of Man, they have a great deal with the UK. They don't have to charge, unlike, Orkney, which is trapped with the Scottish government and tax system, Isle of Man has a 0% income tax. They don't need it. They're pretty good with all their other financial services. The same is true for Guernsey and Jersey. Wouldn't you like to just get 40% of your money back overnight? Just leave the UK if you want that. Look how good the Isle of Man looks. You see this? The Summit Hotel, look how pretty it is. Is it looking any worse for wear for being independent? I think not. I think you could believe this was a part of the UK, you could believe that it's not a part of the UK, and you'd be right in either case. But yeah, before I go, I actually would like to use, if you're here right now and you're watching this video, I'm doing a trip this summer. I'm deliberately going to go somewhere that is, like, not where I have this, like, distrust of, like, places that deliberately go against English. And Quebec is the biggest place for this. They actively are trying to suppress the English language because they want French to be the biggest one. And I've always seen it as, like, Quebec. But I'm actually going to be going on a trip around Quebec, a road trip, I guess. I want to go to some national parks. I've got one of those Canadian park passes. Whereabout in Quebec would you recommend? Because I was looking looking into, like, this. Here's a mind-blowing fact. At the end of the video, to wrap it all up, so email me, ibx2cat@gmail.com, if you have recommendations, or leave them in the comments. I'm very curious. I got this fun national park map over here, so if any of those are good, why is this yellow? What does that mean too? But anyway, if you look at the look at this, are any of these green dots worth going to? But I was looking at something really interesting, and this just to me shows the scale of the new world compared to the old world, because, you know, the Orkney is a subdivision of a subdivision, and that is kind of crazy, right? I mean, United Kingdom divides into 4 countries, is what we call our subdivisions, and then within Scotland, which is a country, or, you know, one of the subdivisions of the UK, a subdivision of that is the council area of the Orkney. As you can see, they're listed over here. Local authority. Actually, I should have shown this. The most no percent place in the UK for the Scottish referendum was actually Orkney at 67% no. They don't want Scotland to be independent. Just an interesting little tidbit, in my opinion. But anyway, yeah, if you so Orkney is like a subdivision of a subdivision, and it's pretty small, right? I mean, it looks pretty small on a map, but then when you do the same for, like, Canada, it's like, well, Canada's pretty big, everyone knows that, but you might not know, for example, that even though Canada is fairly big, the subdivisions are also huge too. Like, yeah, Canada's pretty big. Ontario is bigger than the United Kingdom by quite a bit. You can see that when you really think about it, but you never see them side by side, and so the same is true for Quebec. Quebec is bigger than the United Kingdom, and so this has a real fun thing. If when you take a subdivision of Canada, it's already bigger than a country, but then let's take the Saguenay, Lac Saint Jean region. Oh, yeah, I was looking into this particular region, which is kind of curious. It looks very remote and isolated, and like there's no reason to go there, which seems like my jam. But this tiny region of so okay, it's Saguenay, like you know, I don't know how to do French. I don't know how to pronounce it. I don't know how to type it into Google so that it shows up correctly. Nope, that's the lake we're getting. So Lake Saint Jean is it's surrounded by farms, camping sites, and mountains. But here's the fun fact about it, in my opinion. The entire region, known as Sagami in French, is so big that it's actually it's actually, you know, okay, I found the fact, I lost it. It's actually bigger than, you know, I am a professional and I know what I'm doing here. A land area that is larger than Portugal, the 3rd largest of Quebec's regions and area. So you take a subdivision of the subdivision of Canada, you subdivide it into provinces, you subdivide those provinces into areas, and one of those subdivisions, the 3rd biggest of the, like the 4th biggest or something, is still bigger than Portugal, which is a real place that has, you know, anyway, that's the impact that sovereignty has. The Isle of Man is much better known about than the Shetland Islands. The Isle of Man is better known about than the Isle of Skye, almost because of its independence. And that is an interesting problem we have with the current world. You get a big boost just for having your own self-governing government, and I'm just saying, if you feel like considering independence, do it on that reason alone, I guess. It's just easier to be seen on Google Maps, and so would you like to do it? Maybe you would. Anyway, thank you for checking out my sponsor, I hope you enjoy this video, and I hope you have recommendations, or if you don't have recommendations, I hope that I see you in the next one, because I'll see you there. Bye. Well, maybe I won't, actually. You know, I won't see you anywhere. Also, wait, here's a crazy one. Look at Quebec on a map. I should have shown, this is wild to me. So, even like Canadians I show this to are like, really? Is Quebec really that shape? So, Quebec. This is Quebec. This is Quebec City. Quebec, the province of Canada. So if you look at Quebec on a map, not only is it weirdly shaped, right? Like, look at this, but also this island belongs to Quebec. That's kind of odd if you look at the sea border. But then also, these islands belong to Quebec. How is that possible? How is it the Prince Edward Island does not own this whole thing over here? It's so incredibly confusing. Also, why does Saint-Pierre and Miquelon belong to France and not Quebec? There's all these questions that I have and I don't have answers to, but what I have instead is the fact that this video's over, and I'll see you next time. Bye. Wait, second channel. Don't care. Go die in a hole or something, maybe.